So, quote, as far as I'm concerned, it's just weeks of time dealing with them. They are cuckoo, they are scum. Wow, that is a direct, highly charged quote from President Trump regarding Iran, and it immediately sets the stage for the incredibly high-stakes environment we're looking at today. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are decoding the intense, multi-front policy landscape of the current administration by breaking down a single, action-packed White House press briefing. We're going to see exactly how an administration attempts to control a narrative when faced with rapid-fire questions from the press corps on literally everything, from global military blockades to domestic ethics controversies. Right? So, how exactly does the administration juggle these intense global conflicts right alongside some seriously pressing domestic priorities? We are going to break it all down, sticking strictly to the facts and the official statements presented in the briefing. It's a fascinating look at the actual mechanics of political messaging and policy defense. Okay, let's dive into our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the administration's stance on Iran and energy. Second, we're previewing an upcoming speech from the president. Third, we'll hit ICE enforcement and body cams. And finally, number 4, we'll wrap up with their responses to some public health and ethics questions. Let's get into it. All right, starting right off with Section 1, Iran and energy. Let's look at the stance and strategy here. So in this briefing, reporters immediately challenged the administration on its messaging. They juxtaposed President Trump's aggressive rhetoric. Literally calling elements of the regime liars and scum against Vice President Vance, who was recently on the Joe Rogan podcast expressing frustration at people who say you simply cannot negotiate with Iranians. It's a pretty stark contrast, right? Well, when asked about this apparent contradiction, the press secretary really pushed back. She stated that the president and vice president are actually on the exact same page. Their official stance? Basically, while some elements of the Iranian regime are willing to make a deal, others are absolutely not. Now, you have to remember, this diplomatic tightrope is incredibly critical, especially when you consider the real human cost. Reporters pressed the administration about the 6 Americans who are currently still detained in Iran. So where are the negotiation boundaries? Well, the press secretary clarified that she would never create a red line or lay down specific conditions for negotiations without the president's direct blessing. But she did make it crystal clear that bringing home those wrongfully detained Americans, returning those hostages, remains a massive overarching priority for their national security team. Okay, so what does the actual strategy on the ground look like? The administration came out defending a military campaign with the rather intense name of Operation Epic Fury. They argue that this operation was highly effective at destabilizing the Iranian regime. According to the briefing, Epic Fury successfully neutered the regime's ability to communicate internally. It essentially fragmented their entire system. And the ultimate goal, they stated? To make absolutely sure Iran is no longer the powerful terrorist state it was before this operation kicked off. To put this into perspective, just think about the sheer scale of the military assets deployed right now to enforce the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. This blockade specifically targets ships entering and departing Iranian ports, and the administration says it's happening because Iran failed to honor agreements with the U.S. The numbers here are just staggering. We are talking about more than 10,000 U.S. sailors, Marines, and airmen, plus 2 aircraft carriers, 20 warships, and dozens of aircraft. And it's active. The administration reported that in the first 24 hours alone, U.S. Central Command redirected 2 compliant commercial vessels and actively disabled 1 non-compliant vessel. It is a massive undertaking. Now, obviously, you drop a blockade of that magnitude into one of the world's major oil choke points, and you're going to have some immediate economic concerns, right? People were expecting huge spikes. But the administration used a very specific metric to defend their handling of the fallout. They stated that despite all this military action, the price of oil has actually remained relatively stable at approximately $80 a barrel. So they're pushing back hard against the naysayers who predicted massive, crippling price hikes. Actually, taking it a step further, the administration claimed that gas prices at the pump have dropped by about 60 cents a gallon off the peak of this conflict. Which is kind of surprising, right? You don't usually expect prices to drop during an international blockade. But they are firmly crediting their own swift domestic actions for this relief. They are directly connecting their military strategy and domestic policy to the American consumer's wallet. And here is exactly how they claim they're doing it. They are using aggressive, localized domestic policies as a shield to buffer the U.S. economy against the shockwaves of that global blockade. Basically, they released oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, implemented a Jones Act waiver, utilized fuel environmental waivers, and the president even went as far as invoking the Defense Production Act to restart California oil production. They threw a lot at this. Wrapping up the foreign policy portion of the briefing, we got a few more quick diplomatic updates. First, on the recent drone strikes against U.S. facilities in Erbil, Kurdistan, the administration stated very firmly that Iran is paying the consequences for violating their word. Then, on a totally different note, they highlighted the president's recent trip to the NATO summit in Ankara. They made a point to say he greatly enjoyed his visit, successfully pushed NATO allies to step up and pay their fair share for defense, and really appreciated his bilateral talks with Turkey's President Erdogan.
All right, let's pivot to Section 2, previewing the president's upcoming speech. So, the president, who has been in office for over 540 days now, is gearing up to address the nation in a major primetime speech. But reporters were quick to point out what looks like a potential political disconnect. A lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill are heavily urging the administration to focus on the economy ahead of the midterm elections. However, the administration previewed that the president is actually going to make a major announcement focusing on the integrity of the 2020 elections and the SAFE Act. When reporters asked, hey, why isn't Iran or the economy the sole focus right now? The administration defended the choice, stating that election integrity is a nonpartisan issue that Americans care deeply about. And to counter that criticism about ignoring the economy, the press secretary busted out one of Washington's absolute favorite classic defenses, stating the administration can walk and chew gum at the same time. She emphasized that the president works around the clock on both foreign and domestic policies simultaneously. And as proof of this ongoing economic focus, she pointed out that the president recently visited a Mack truck facility in Pennsylvania. They claim that specific business has been greatly strengthened by his economic policies over the last year and a half.
Moving right along to Section 3, ICE enforcements and body cams on the domestic front. Things got pretty tense here. The press corps raised some very serious concerns following a week where 3 men were killed during encounters with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. But despite these incidents, the Department of Homeland Security issued verbal guidance to their field offices, confirming that ICE vehicle stops will absolutely continue. The administration's stated position is that the President and the Secretary of Homeland Security are in total agreement on this. These vehicle stops are a completely necessary tool for ICE agents executing their deportation campaign against illegal alien criminals. But, of course, that brings up the issue of transparency during these stops, and reporters really questioned the lack of body camera footage. The administration laid out this 2-step timeline to address the rollout. Step 1, they noted that over half of all ICE field offices are currently equipped with body cameras. Step 2, the remainder of the field offices should receive them within 60 days. Interestingly enough, though, the administration explicitly blamed this slower-than-expected rollout on Democrats, claiming they caused the delay by shutting down DHS for several weeks. Okay, final section, number 4, we're looking at public health and ethics responsive. Talk about a rapid-fire pivot. In the span of just a few minutes, the briefing room went through a whirlwind of topics. First, they addressed an unusually high number of cases in a produce-related parasite outbreak. The administration assured everyone the White House is monitoring the situation, working directly with the CDC and FDA to trace the original source, and they confirmed no funding cuts have slowed down that response. Boom. Next question. They field an inquiry about a potential conflict of interest regarding a Kazakhstan mining deal approved by the president, where his sons later took a 20% investment. The administration maintained that the president was completely unaware of his son's involvement until the media reported it. And finally, they were asked about a staffer accused of profiting off the president's speeches. The administration succinctly confirmed that the individual has been placed on unpaid administrative leave. So from massive military blockades in the Middle East and strategic oil reserve releases, all the way to debates over ICE body cameras and primetime speeches on the 2020 election, this administration is clearly managing an incredibly complex and crowded agenda. So I'll leave you with this final pivotal question to chew on. How will this high-stakes balancing act of aggressive foreign blockades and controversial domestic election priorities ultimately impact voter trust at the ballot box in the upcoming midterms? It's a fascinating dynamic, and we'll for sure continue to watch it unfold. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, keep asking the big questions.